Wow. Wow. Potential. What is your potential? Does anybody even know what the word potential means? Well, I'll tell you. What we're really talking about is latent abilities that we have the ability to develop over time that we can use for our future successes. The word potential also comes from the Latin word potentia, which means power. So I want to change the question that I first asked you in terms of what is your potential to what is your power? Now, when I ask what is your potential, that's really just casting your mind forward. It's forcing you to think about what you have the ability to do in your future. But when I say, what is your power? Well, that is demanding that you take inventory of the power you have access to right now. Now, as a youth development worker, one of my passions is about working with young people and getting them to identify not only their potential, but their own personal power. One of the reasons why I do this is because when I was a young person, I actually went through a period of not having any power, or at least this is what I internalized and I believed. Growing up as a young black boy on a council estate in a single parent family provided me with the first-hand experience of marginalization. That experience really affected my perspective of life. It affected how I looked at myself, and it affected how I perceived the world around me. And so, by the age of 12, I really disengaged with education. Marginalization was having its impact on me. It was chipping its way really at my self-esteem, at my confidence, and who I knew I really was inside, but had that covered over. And so, during that period of time, I had a timeline of events that was taking place. And about 13 years old, started to follow the wrong types of crowds, got into drinking, experimenting with drugs. I then moved from stealing to robbing. And by the time I was 14 years old, I was actually robbing people with knives. By the time I was 15, I was selling drugs. And by the time I was 16, I got to the stage where I left school with no GCSEs and nothing really to account for. And it was, I felt like the experience itself, I felt like I started school quite a happy, energetic young person with lots to offer life. And by the time I left school at the age of 16, I was decimated. And so, when we look at 20 years on, from that particular period, young black boys today are still the least likely to get the grades that everybody else is getting. They're 3 times more than likely to be excluded from school. And so we have a bit of an issue within our society. We've heard a lot about marginalization today. Marginalization affects lots of different people. When you're not a part of society, when you're not a part of something, then you will seek to destroy it. And so was my behavior. And so, when we really look at potential and we want to look at your own personal power, I want to encourage everybody here today to say, well, what are we doing to really create that inclusive society that we like to talk about? What are we doing to incorporate and make actually everybody feel like they're actually a part of this society? When we're looking at the prison population today, the prison population, we're talking about there's over 14.7% of the prison population is actually black, but only 2.9% of the actual population of this country. We've got a problem. We have a problem, people. And it's slowly, silently pushed under the rug and not really dealt with. And so my own personal story is that by the time I was 18, I found a youth group, and that youth group was set up for young black people, and it actually gave me the space to deal with and talk through and help me to find my own personal, my own voice, because I'd been silenced. And internally, what that done was a very destructive force that I enacted out. And so, the internalization of marginalization is really talking about how we socially exclude whole sections of a community. So, that going through that process really enabled me to find my own power. And by the time I was 19, I became a youth worker. By the time I was 21, I'd gone to university. 24, I graduated. By 27, I set up my first company, Alchemy Consultancy and Training. 10 years later, I have 2 companies, both dedicated towards helping young people to identify and fulfill their potential. I tell you not my story because I want accolade or sympathy. I tell you my story because I want you to step out in your own power. I'll finish just with this quote. It's an old African proverb that says, "You don't judge a civilization by its advancement of technology. You judge a civilization by how it treats its most vulnerable." Thank you, everybody.